Warning: the Curious Native podcast contains mature topics and themes that are intended for an older youth and adult audience. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey, welcome to the Curious Native Podcast. I'm your host, hunnasmak, and today we'll be discussing white fear in cinema, how it reflects in alien invasion movies, and how that affects Native communities. Alien invasion movies often portray people of color as the other, which reinforces harmful stereotypes and biases. This portrayal is particularly harmful to Native communities who have been the victims of violence and exploitation throughout history. We'll be exploring how this portrayal of people of color in alien invasion movies perpetuates the idea that white people are superior to people of color, and how this portrayal can lead to racial profiling, police brutality, and other forms of discrimination. We'll also be discussing how filmmakers can work to create more inclusive and accurate portrayals of people of color in cinema, and the steps they can take to avoid harmful stereotypes and tropes. And with that being said, please continue listening. For starters, what is white fear? White fear is a term used to describe the anxiety and fear that some white people in response to the ongoing changing demographics of the United States and the increasing visibility and political power of people of color. The fear is also often driven by a sense of loss of power and privilege, like literally Crimea River, and can manifest in a variety of ways, including support for policies that restrict immigration, opposing to affirmative action, and other efforts to address systematic racism, and a belief in the superiority of white culture. White fear can also contribute to the spread of conspiracy theories and other forms of misinformation, as well as to acts of violence against people of color. Well, with that, how does white fear manifest in films and TV? White fear often manifests in movies and TV by portraying people of color as the other. The portrayal reinforces harmful stereotypes and biases, and it can lead to racial profiling and police brutality and other forms of discrimination. Additionally, white fear can also lead to the erasure of the complex histories and cultures of people of color, and it can also perpetuate the idea that white people are superior to people of color. White fear can also manifest in the way that, movies and TV shows are marketed. For example, movies and TV shows that feature people of color may be marketed towards a specific demographic rather than being marketed to a broad audience. This can lead to a lack of representation for people of color in media, and it can also perpetuate the idea that people of color are not as important or as valuable as white people. Overall, white fear can manifest in a variety of ways in movies and TV, and it's important that we work to combat these harmful biases and stereotypes. By creating more inclusive and accurate media, we can, help create a more just and equitable society. White fear can have have, a significant and lasting impact on people of color in a number of ways. First, it can lead to policies and practices that perpetuate systematic racism and discrimination, such as mass incarceration, police brutality, and the criminalization of poverty. These policies can have devastating consequences for communities of color, including higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and poor health care. Second, white fear can contribute to the spread of hate speech and other forms of bigotry, which can lead to violence and other forms of harm against people of color. This can also include hate crimes, harassment, and discrimination in housing, employment, and education. Third, white fear can create a climate of fear and mistrust between communities of color and white people, which can make it difficult to build meaningful relationships and address the root cause of systematic racism. This can also make it difficult for people of color to access resources and support, as they may be hesitant to seek help from institutions that they perceive as hostile or indifferent to their needs. Finally, white fear can perpetuate a culture of silence and inaction amongst white people who may be reluctant to speak out against racism and other forms of injustices for fear of being ostracized or marginalized. This can make it difficult to build coalitions and movements that are capable of effecting meaningful change. Overall, white fear can also have a profound and lasting impact on people of color, perpetuating systematic racism and discrimination, contributing to violence and other forms of harm, creating a climate of fear and mistrust, and perpetuating a culture of silence and inaction. This portrayal is particularly harmful to Native American communities, who have been the victims of violence and exploitation throughout history. This portrayal of Native Americans as savages or barbarians reinforces harmful stereotypes and biases and erases the complex histories and cultures of Native American tribes. Additionally, the use of violence against Native Americans in movies and television shows reinforces the idea that violence is an acceptable way to solve problems, which can have real world consequences for Native American communities. Furthermore, the portrayal of people of color as dangerous or unpredictable can have a real world impact on how they are treated and, by law enforcement and other authorities. This can lead to racial profiling, police brutality, and other forms of discrimination, which can have a serious consequence for people of color. It's important for filmmakers and other media creators to be aware of the impact that their work can have on people of color, and to take steps to ensure that that their work does not perpetuate harmful stereotypes or biases. This can include working with people of color to accurately represent their experiences and cultures and avoid using, violence or other harmful tropes. By doing so, we can create a more inclusive and equitable media landscape that accurately represents the experiences of all people. Now that you know what white fear is and how it manifests and how it harms people of color, let's talk about how some scholars and activists have argued that the alien invasion movies can be seen as anti indigenous, as they often depict the invasion and colonization of Earth by beings as a metaphor for historical and ongoing colonization of indigenous lands and the displacement of marginalized indigenous peoples. This can perpetuate harmful stereotypes and narratives about indigenous people and, our relationship to the land, and can contribute to the erasure of indigenous voices and perspectives. One way in which alien invasion movies can be seen as anti indigenous is by reinforcing the idea of the noble savage, the idea that indigenous peoples are somehow more in tune with the natural world, and we possess a special kind of wisdom that is lacking in modern society. And that's also another problem I have with it. It's usually modern society as if we are a thing of the past and we are here now, and a lot of our inventions weren't as if they aren't the reason why modern society is modern society. I don't know. It's This can be seen in movies like Avatar, where the indigenous people, the Navi, are portrayed as living in harmony with their environment and possessing a deep spiritual connection to the land. However, this portrayal can be harmful as it perpetuates the idea that indigenous people are somehow other or exotic and can contribute to the erasure of our lived experiences and struggles. It can also be used to justify the continued exploitation and colonization of indigenous lands by portraying them as untouched or unspoiled by modern society. Another way in which alien invasion movies can be seen as anti-indigenous is by perpetuating harmful stereotypes, I apologize, about indigenous people and our relationship to the land. For example, in movies like Independence Day, the alien invaders are often portrayed as wanting to conquer and colonize Earth in order to exploit resources, a narrative that echoes the historical and ongoing exploitation of indigenous lands and people. Furthermore, the portrayal of indigenous people in these movies is often limited to a few stereotypical roles, such as the wise elder or the noble savage, in which, it can contribute to the erasure of our lived experiences and struggles and, diversity. As I am not. I am not a noble savage. I will smack you in your forehead if you say something stupid to me. I'm sorry to tell you. That's just the truth. This can be seen, though, as a form of erasure and marginalization, as it perpetuates the idea that indigenous people are somehow other or exotic and can contribute to the ongoing colonization. Another way it could be seen as anti indigenous is by perpetuating the idea that indigenous people are somehow primitive or that we're backwards and that we need to be saved by modern society. This can be seen in movies like War of the Worlds, where the alien invaders are portrayed as technologically advanced and superior to humans, while indigenous people are portrayed as being helpless and in need of rescue. This can be seen as a form of cultural imperialism, as it reinforces the idea that modern society is somehow superior to indigenous ways of life and that indigenous people need to be civilized or modernized in order to survive. This can contribute to the ongoing marginalization and erasure of indigenous voices and perspectives and can perpetuate harmful narratives about indigenous people and our relationship to the land. Overall, while not all alien invasion movies can be seen as anti indigenous, many of them perpetuate harmful stereotypes and narratives about indigenous people and our relationship to the land. This can contribute to the ongoing colonization and exploitation of us and our lands and resources, and can perpetuate the erasure of indigenous voices and perspectives. As such, it is important to critically examine these movies and their underlying messages and to work to uplift and center indigenous voices and perspectives in our media and cultural narratives. Speaking of movies, Independence Day is a 1996 American science fiction disaster film that depicts an alien invasion of Earth. The movie is often criticized for its anti indigenous themes and for perpetuating the harmful stereotypes about indigenous people. One of the most prominent examples of this portrayal of the character Russell Case, a Vietnam War veteran who's depicted as an alcoholic and is living on a reservation. The movie portrays him as a drunk Indian who has been left behind by society, and who is only able to redeem himself by sacrificing his life to save humanity. This perpetuates harmful stereotypes about indigenous people as being alcoholics and as being left behind by society. Another example of the movie's anti-indigenous themes is the portrayal of the aliens as being savages who are coming to Earth to destroy it. This narrative is reminiscent of, colonists' attitude towards indigenous people who are often portrayed as savages who needed to be civilized by European colonizers. This movie reinforces the idea that modern society is superior to indigenous ways of life and that indigenous people are inherently violent and destructive. This movie is also driven by white fear, which this episode is about, as it portrays white Americans as the heroes who are able to save the world from the alien invasion. This narrative reinforces the idea that white people are superior to people of color, and that they are the only ones who are capable of saving the world from destruction. This is a harmful and dangerous narrative that perpetuates white supremacy and erases the contributions of people of color. Overall, Independence Day is a movie that perpetuates harmful stereotypes about indigenous people and reinforces white supremacy. It is important to critically examine these movies, like I mentioned earlier, to work to create a more equitable and just society and just and equitable media scape for all people. Another film I like to talk about is War of the Worlds, 2005. War of the Worlds is a 2005 American science fiction action film directed by Steven Spielberg, based on the 1998 novel of the same name by H.G. Wells. This movie is often criticized for its perpetuation of white fear, which is evident of its portrayal of the aliens and the way in which it depicts the destruction of society. One of the ways which War of the Worlds perpetuates white fear is through its portrayal of aliens as being other. The aliens are depicted as being grotesque and violent, with no regard for human life. They are also portrayed as being technologically advanced, which reinforces the idea that modern society is superior to indigenous ways of life. Another way in which War of the World perpetuates white fear is through its depiction of destruction of society. I am so sorry for stuttering so much. The movie depicts the aliens as being able to destroy entire cities with ease, which reinforces the idea that white Americans are under threat from eternal forces. This portrayal of destruction of society reinforces the idea that white Americans are under threat from people who are different from them and that they need to be protected. This movie also perpetuates white fear through its depiction of the main character, Ray Ferrier, who is played by Tom Cruise. Ray is depicted as being a white American who is struggling to protect his family from the alien invasion. This portrayal reinforces the idea that white Americans are under threat from external forces and that they need to be protected. The movie also perpetuates white fear through its portrayal of the military. The military is depicted as being unable to protect white Americans from the alien invasion, which reinforces the idea that white Americans are under threat from external forces. This portrayal of the military reinforces the idea that white Americans need to be protected from people who are different and from people who are within our own society, as, the aliens literally pop up out of the ground after being down there for a long fucking time. Another way in which War of the Worlds perpetuates white fear is through its portrayal of the relationship between Ray and his daughter, Rachel. Rachel is depicted as being a white American who is in need of protection from the alien invasion. The portrayal of Rachel reinforces that white Americans are under threat from external forces, which I kept seeing that one pop up, so I just wanted to mention it. I don't know if that's quite the greatest example of a white fear, but it definitely is something there. The idea of white women and white girls being needed to being protected from, the other. That's definitely something there. But from the way it was being, laid out, I don't know if that is exactly one to one. But I do think it's something to think about. Furthermore, the movie perpetuates white fear by depicting the aliens as being able to infiltrate and manipulate human society. The aliens are shown to be able to take over human bodies and use them for their own purposes. This portrayal of the aliens reinforces the idea that white Americans are under threat from people who are different from them. In conclusion, War of the Worlds perpetuates white fear through its portrayal of aliens as being other, its depiction of the destruction of society, its portrayal of the main character and his daughter as being in need of protection, its portrayal of the military as being unable to protect white Americans, and its depiction of the aliens as being able to control the environment, infiltrate human society. These portrayals reinforce the idea that white Americans are under threat from external forces, which is like, that's the basis of white fear, is the idea that they're all around us, they're with us. Which I wish I would have mentioned. What movie is it? Is it Invasion of the Body Snatchers I'm thinking of? I don't think so. I think it's the one where they put on the glasses. I can't remember. I'll maybe do a sequel to this and I'll talk more about those films, but for now, In conclusion, we must be aware of the harmful effects of white fear in cinema and take steps to create more inclusive and accurate portrayals of people of color. By working together, we can help to combat harmful biases and stereotypes and create more just and equitable society for all. Let's continue to work towards a future where all people are represented fairly and accurately in media. With that being said, if you liked today's episode and would like more like this, please go ahead and subscribe, like, share, and comment to let me know you're enjoying all the hard work and research that goes into these episodes. And if you like me and what I have to say, please feel free to follow my main Twitter page at hunnasmak, and please follow the podcast's official Twitter page at TCNpod. Everything will be linked, including all my sources that I used. And with that being said, I'm hunnasmak, and this has been the Curious Native Podcast.